What up, everyone? Alex from MarsBased here. Welcome to another episode of Life on Mars. Today, we'll be talking to Chiara Massironi and Kevin Whinnery from TwilioQuest. TwilioQuest is a learning platform for people who want to learn how to code, right? So if you want to learn PHP, Python, and JavaScript through a gamified experience with some retro-like graphics, 8-bit music, and a big, huge dose of nostalgia, that's your product. We had a really interesting conversation talking about the product, talking about the idea, talking about the science of learning. Although we didn't get that much into detail about that, we'll have to record a second part of the episode. We talked about learning how to code. We talked about how to market this. We talked about open source philosophy and how to gather community around these kind of projects, and much more. So if you're interested in how to learn how to code or how to teach other people how to code and about these kind of products, this is definitely an interesting episode for you. So I hope you enjoy it. Chiara, Kevin, how are you? Welcome to Life on Mars.
We're doing all right. Thanks for having us. Very excited to chat today.
We got a distributed chat here. Chiara is in Madrid. Kevin, you mentioned you are 6-7 hours away. Where are you based now?
I'm in Minneapolis today. I live just outside the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, in Minnesota here in the States.
And top of the morning to you, because it seems like you got a very sunny day. So it's good to see some optimism as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely things are looking up. So, yeah.
Great. We're here to discuss TwilioQuest because we've been running the podcast Life on Mars for over a year now. We've been talking about hosting. We've been talking about Ruby on Rails, bootstrap companies, remote working, SaaS, scalability, whatnot. But how about learning how to code? This is a very specific topic. We haven't talked about that, and it seems like in Twilio, because you guys are working at Twilio, there's been this initiative that started like 6 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, by you, Kevin. So you might want to give us a little bit of context as to how does it start and what is TwilioQuest exactly?
Yeah, sure. So TwilioQuest is an educational video game that we've built that sort of targets early in career software developers. We look to teach like foundational programming skills. But we also have content in TwilioQuest that teaches Twilio APIs specifically. The sort of origin of this program was we used TwilioQuest many years ago for like just live first-party training for the Twilio API, like that we would deliver for our customers. But over time, we found that it was a generally useful learning platform with some unique advantages. So we started to kind of build it out for a general audience as well, which I'm sure we'll dig into. But yeah, TwilioQuest today is largely for folks that are learning how to code, but it also kind of began its life as Twilio's like first-party training program as well.
But it's interesting because I thought you mentioned that you're targeting developers early in their careers, and I thought that would be for people who don't know how to program. So how different is that in terms of demographics?
Yeah, I mean, so the people that we find benefiting the most from TwilioQuest are like university students, boot camp students, folks that are kind of in that stage of their career, and also like career switchers, like folks that are acquiring programming as a new skill from another discipline. So the content in TwilioQuest right now is a great way to like reinforce the kind of lessons that you might learn in a computer science course, or if you're doing any kind of self-paced content. Because you're installing the tools on your computer, you're executing the code on your computer. The sort of you're sort of applying what you learn about the syntax, like maybe in some kind of browser-based environment, and actually using it to write code and execute code on your computer. So that's generally like the sweet spot of user that we've found. So learning to code for the first time is definitely something you can do in TwilioQuest. But what we see in the audience is most often that type of user that that knows that they're on the road to becoming a programmer, but is using TwilioQuest to reinforce those skills.
Which is very interesting because it seems like a long-term investment, right? You're teaching people how to code because essentially like one of the end goals, of course, will be like use the Twilio APIs, right? So But before going into the technicalities as to like the programming languages that are being taught there, the actual content of the program, let's introduce Chiara a little bit because we know each other since your times at SendGrid, and you've always been a very community-oriented person, right? So you've been working in the startups department, also in Twilio before moving over to TwilioQuest. So why did you join this specific program or this specific application, and what attracted you from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, as you say, I spent a lot of time in the startup community, kind of across EMEA. And when SendGrid was acquired by Twilio, the startups team fell under what's known as the developer network at Twilio. So I continued on the startup team there for about a year. And then I had the opportunity to move over from startup community to developer community, which was something that was new to me. And I don't think that there's a cooler way to do it than through a video game. So that's how I ended up doing this.
I thought that you would be just like, you were too busy traveling all over the place and you were fed up with traveling. You said like, you know what, I want to go back to playing computers, something like that. No, which begs the question, like, I don't know if you're a coder or not, Chiara. I assume, Kevin, because you came up with the idea, you might have more like a technical grasp on this. But like, how did you two learn how to code? If you're, because I don't know that part of your background.
Yeah,
Unless
totally.
you're knowledge of coding.
Yeah, I was going to see who was going to bite first, but so I started programming kind of in high school a little bit. Like there were some programming courses, and I learned just enough to like program a version of a game called Red Rover. I don't know if this exists internationally or not, but lines of children like hold hands, and then you send someone across to like try to run through the hands and like break through a line of kids. It may be a specifically American invention, but I figured out how to like write a video game version of this like schoolyard game. And yeah, and just have kind of been bumming around programming since then.
All right. Chiara, what's your
Yeah,
notions of?
so I don't have a background in software engineering at all. However, throughout my career, I've worked with technical teams in different environments. And so it was always something that I wanted to do. And I've never had like I've started several courses and never really built anything with what I had learned. And so the mission of TwilioQuest really resonates with me personally, as someone who has wanted to learn to code for a long time. And yeah, being able to do that in a fun way, I think is pretty cool.
Because in terms of community, right, it seems that not only you're investing in the community, which is something that's a really nice of you as a company. Of course, there's some kind of thing that you want to get out of it, which is more users, more knowledge of your platform, more users of the Twilio products, by the way. So, but at least you're investing in teaching the new generations of developers. And precisely also, maybe you can also eat your own dog's food for people inside the company who don't know how to code and would like to build things, which I don't know if it's your case, Chiara, that perhaps you wanted to learn. So maybe with this wave of no code / low code / small code, whatever you want to call it, is this something that can also profit from initiatives like TwilioQuest, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen folks internally use TwilioQuest to upskill, absolutely, across different teams.
Great.
And as we look at like the roadmap for content within TwilioQuest, there's an opportunity to bridge that gap for, rather than being like language specific, actually looking at how to encourage technical fluency, I would say.
And also because in terms of community, this is something that we recorded a couple of episodes ago. We talked about community with developer advocates, right? So the role of developer relations, developer advocates, there are millions of names
Sure.
for that sort of role, and how they play into the ecosystem. And most of the time, it's kind of like a selling, but not selling. So in the sense that, they go out there for a conference, they provide value. Of course, there's a pragmatic way of saying it, which is like, yeah, of course, you wouldn't be going to the conferences if you were not getting out of it. But sometimes it's so long term that it's perceived as something purely altruistic, right? Which is something I like about this kind of project, because it seems that your investment is in people who will most likely not be using your APIs, your products in a couple of years, because it takes a lot of time to learn programming. How have you have you seen any kind of metrics as to how long does it take people from starting your program to start using some of your products?
It's been tricky since we've only been explicitly targeting early in career developers for the last like couple of years. The TwilioQuest as recently as like 2018, 2019 was still largely targeted at like the Twilio developer community to help them just adopt the product more quickly. Generally speaking, like we saw the people who used TwilioQuest achieved like product activation metrics faster than other cohorts of the population. Like we could see, this set of accounts, used more Twilio and sort of got to the finish line faster of like successfully making API requests. So we knew that it was beneficial from that standpoint. I think like for when we talk about like measuring the long tail, we do expect to see that, and we've started to try to put some measurement in place to see how that will grow over time. But we also have like exemplars that have been doing this for longer than we have. Like we, have a great partnership with GitHub, who has a really, long running and successful education program, and they have, their story is not mine to tell, but they have achieved like really great results by investing in student communities and seeing how they grow into GitHub users over time. And there have been a few examples like that we're tracking as well.
Actually, how do you? Well, I mean, in your new role, Chiara, so you might be looking for some kind of partnerships as well, which is also one of the things you have specialized in over the years. What's the face of the people like when you approach them with a gamified, I don't know if that's the right word to use, like a gamified learning program such as TwilioQuest? Are they like, wow, this is extremely nerdy? Like, do even like more formal companies understand it? If you know what I mean?
I'd say that generally the response has been really positive because it is a really different and exciting format that people aren't used to. And so typically the conversation, runs smoothly in that they have the opportunity to offer their community something different. But it's definitely been a learning curve to approach this type of partnership versus the partnerships that I was used to doing in the startup world.
Yeah, because like it seems like the other partnerships you were doing precisely before at SandGrid were more like, yeah, I'm gonna give you credit, something more actionable in the short term for startups in dire need of what you actually were offering. So it was much more actionable, which I don't know, maybe more. I wouldn't call it short-sighted, but excuse me, I'm not native in English, so it was kind of like more like I have immediate rewards, right? Whereas here's like you're giving something to the community that will pay off in a few years' time, which is something completely different. So I think maybe you got to think bigger, if you know what I mean. Talking to GitHub and talking to, I don't know what other big players, but not to the direct startups, right? So where do you find like who's your ideal partner in that sense?
Yeah, so I mean, GitHub is one that with there's alignment in our education programs, and so it's been a great partnership for that reason. But then a lot of the partnerships that we're working on currently is actually with boot camps and figuring out at what stage of the learning journey a boot camp student could benefit from TwilioQuest, whether that is through a TwilioQuest event, through using TwilioQuest as part of the application process for being approved to join a bootcamp, or even as like a classroom enrichment activity. So our partnerships definitely vary. Another example is Code Newbies, who have a community of early in career or folks that are learning to code for the first time. And I think that's what's interesting about TwilioQuest is that we have an opportunity to partner with a real wide range of organizations and educators as well.
All right, Kevin, take me back to when this started. Like, how did you actually come with a very, very like an MVP, if there was ever an MVP for this, and how did you position it or how did you sell it internally in Twilio as to like, hey, I've got this idea, I'm gonna make it work.
Yeah. That's a good question. So the place where it actually started was we were getting ready for Twilio's like third developer conference, which was back in 2013, and I was a developer evangelist at that time. That's what I was hired at Twilio to do, and folks had heard that I had built like a developer training and developer certification program at my last job. And we're like, all right, Kevin, you are now in charge of the first day of the conference, and it needs to be a training day where you teach everyone how to do Twilio. And because I had been doing developer training for kind of a long time, I had sort of done it in the way in which you've likely experienced developer training, which is you have a presentation, then there's some hands-on stuff, then you have a presentation, then there's some hands-on stuff. And the problem with that was that it felt like I was always missing some portion of the audience. I was either going too fast for some people, or I was going too slow for other people, and I never really hit the right mixture for a diverse group of learners. So I started thinking through like, all right, what would it look like for people to advance at their own pace during training? And being a huge dork and being into video games and role-playing games in particular, the metaphor of leveling up at different paces was the one that kind of stuck out for me. And if you could power level and get through a bunch of content very quickly, that's great. We want to support that experience. But if you only sort of get through a few pieces of content, that's also great. Like you're learning at the pace which is appropriate for you. So over the course of like a couple of weeks, I hacked together the first version of TwilioQuest, which was in the browser. And it was essentially just like a video game flavored like tutorial website. And like the Twilio team would go around and manually like see if people had completed code challenges that attendees would use, like that they would kind of do at their own pace. We'd validate that they completed these tutorials and then award them points. And then they'd have little, items that would appear on their avatars and things like that. And that was kind of where we started, where we would use TwilioQuest for our live training events that we would do for a number of years. And we saw it like sort of be irrationally motivating. Like we had audiences who wouldn't let us leave until they completed the last level and like got the last like special hat for their avatar. So like the amount of engagement that we generated through this program was surprising enough to us, where we were like, oh, hey, well, what would happen if we made this self-service and like let anybody do it outside of a live training event? So we made some investments to do that. And then this most recent iteration of TwilioQuest, we kind of went from being like a video game themed trailhead to like a full-on downloadable PC game, because we wanted to kind of double down on the video game mechanics that made the content as appealing as it was on the web. And that is kind of where how we got to the place where we are today. So it wasn't necessarily like I came in with like a really great pitch for like creating a PC game and kind of got it funded that way. We kind of had some early iterations and some early success with this as a learning platform. And then we tried a few more experiments. Like the first experiment was like, well, what'll happen if we go to the desktop? And make some technical changes. And we saw engagement essentially double over what we had in the browser, like in terms of the amount of content that people consumed. And then we tested, well, what would happen if we had non-Twilio content in TwilioQuest? And we saw that, our JavaScript mission became the most popular piece of content that we had in TwilioQuest. And now like our experiments are more around like, well, how can we serve like educators? Like how can we make this part of a curriculum? And that's a big theme of our upcoming 3.2 release at Signal this fall. So yeah, so I don't know, maybe that is helpful context to have, but if you have any questions, we'd love to dig in further into any of that.
I would have thought, like, I don't know, maybe the way I would have approached something like that, being as bootstrapping as I am, maybe that I would have done something like terminal only, but on the other hand, that's also like pretty technical for non-developers perhaps. So
Sure.
But one of the things I really like, and I wanna touch down on this, is like the choice of languages, right? Because I mean, I've taught people how to program in the past, and one of the things that people struggle the most to understand is that in order to be a good programmer, I believe, that's a personal opinion, you need to know at least 2 different languages, right? And that's one of the things I struggle with when I talk to people running boot camps, and they're like, yeah, we only do JavaScript, we only do Ruby, we only do Python, whatever. It's like, well, then you're teaching them to be JavaScript developers, but not developers, right? I don't know, maybe that's too much of a strong opinion, but with which languages did you start? Because right now we've got PHP, JavaScript, and Python. And why did you come with this choice of technologies?
Yeah, I think part of it was like we we wanted to try to teach like foundational skills. We kind of knew that we wanted to target an early in career audience. So like the first steps in a couple of popular programming languages that are often used by like boot camps and other educational institutions was the reason specifically why we chose JavaScript and Python. Like we knew that it was likely to cover a large swath of people that were learning to code for the first time. And PHP, we happen to have a team member who is into PHP, and she wrote a couple of objectives within TwilioQuest to teach her beloved programming language. So it was kind of a bonus we got by virtue of members of our team. But JavaScript and Python specifically we chose because we knew that it was popular in bootcamp audiences. But like it is, like to your point, I think it's useful to cross-train. I think like once you do know two languages, then you start to understand concepts. Like you see like, oh, this is a list, and like list iteration, how you interact with like an ordered set of items becomes clearer as a concept, because it's not just a JavaScript API that does a JavaScript thing. Like you understand what is like the concept. So we definitely have seen that use case for TwilioQuest too, where, you know, a C# programmer that's been doing C# for decades, this is one specific example of somebody who picked up TwilioQuest to like learn Python and learn JavaScript, and explicitly for the purposes of cross training and picking up new skills that way.
And I'm playing devil's advocate here, but maybe like you're getting pressure from the marketing side, like, hey, why don't we have like Java content? Why don't we have Ruby content? Why don't we have like, I don't know, other languages? So I don't know, Chiara, if I'm on your side here, like, are you pressuring Kevin to add more programming languages or frameworks over there? And how does that help you or constrain you in order to create more partnerships with companies who might be requiring a language that you don't have?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think generally with the languages we have, we can serve at least the large majority of the boot camps and educators we're speaking to. I think where it gets interesting is kind of what I touched on earlier, where it's more about like tech fluency and like workplace readiness skills. So like, yes, learning how to program in a specific language is great, but how will that person then go on to use that in the workplace? And what other skills should we be teaching them in order to be successful on day one? And that's where I hope to see more content in TwilioQuest in the future.
Is there anything you can disclose about the upcoming version? I don't know, this will come out in a month, more or less. So I don't, might be that it's already out. So there's something that, what can we expect from that? Can we expect Ruby? Or very, very bullish on Ruby here. So that's why it begs the question.
Yeah, it is. You are unlikely to see Ruby, sadly. I actually do love Ruby as well. Like I made a small SaaS business that was based on a Rails application with Adobe Flex on the front end many years ago. So digging way back. But the work that Chiara has done with like working with educators and kind of learning where TwilioQuest fits in their mission has kind of informed like the next iteration of content that we're getting ready, which will be like in October. So it'll be a little bit longer out there before like we have our big formal release. But what you'll see is like a new set of content that is targeted towards specifically equipping developers with like knowledge of what an API is, how APIs work, and like how they integrate into a software application. Largely because like we found like the language content was great, and it sort of reinforced skills that were being taught in institutions already, but is not necessarily novel. But what would be useful and would be novel is teaching the concepts behind APIs. So we're creating the Arcane Academy of API Arts, which is a Hogwarts-style school where you will learn the magic of APIs. This will be a new explorable area in the game. We also have a brand new like visual look for the game that's going to be rolling out. We commissioned, original artwork with from a really great pixel artist, and we also have. Perhaps most excitingly, at least for me, is we'll be open sourcing our content and Amazing. Documenting our TwilioQuest authoring tools. So anybody can like create new content, new levels and extend TwilioQuest in any way they see fit with new and teach whatever they would like using our platform.
That sounds terrific. Actually, I don't know if that's got something to do. Probably not, because it was announced a couple days ago. Only I saw, like, I think we all woke up to this incredible news that the Nintendo Switch platform, they will be releasing this. I don't know if it's a game or if it's the software to teach people how to program games inside a game. And I was like, wow, this is groundbreaking. And I didn't see this move coming anytime soon, but it's like, I don't know. Like, of course, your story is completely unrelated here, but does that help you in terms of spreading the message that this is something that needs to be more widespread as general knowledge in the population?
Yeah, I think so. Like, yeah, we saw the news a couple days ago as well, and I think what's going to be neat about it, and what is generally good about this class of tools, is creating the mindset of programming, of like understanding what loops are and like how to set up like instruction steps, because essentially it's going to be like it looks like it's going to be a Scratch-like environment that you control with like thumbsticks. So I'm actually extremely interested from like a user experience standpoint to see like how they pull off visual programming using like a gamepad. So I mean, I think it does speak to the larger theme of technical literacy and understanding how to write code. Like even if it is like low code, no code, those types of things. Chiara is far too modest about her own skills with automation. Like she's very good at crafting like automated flows with tools that would be considered like no code or low code. And I think like those are the kinds of skills you're going to need to be successful as a professional.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to ask Chiara, so how is how are startup ecosystem or tech ecosystems welcoming initiatives like this? Because for me, like, I know this is an unsolicited opinion, but that's why we are on a highly opinionated podcast. It is irresponsible of every city to just rely on the developer bootcamps to create the new waves of developers, right? Of course, there's open source. People can learn with open source, but it's not very popular, unfortunately. Of course, there's universities, but they also have got their own concerns and issues. But like, how are the main actors in every tech ecosystem welcoming initiatives like this, particularly taking into account that it comes from a corporate, even if it's Twilio and it's got a great reputation among developers, still a corporate, right? So
yeah, that's a tricky question.
Yeah, no easy questions here, huh?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, like generally the approach has been welcomed, and we're seeing a lot of interest and kind of just like inbound discovery, right? People are looking for different ways to learn. And so a lot of the users we have within TwilioQuest are folks that have found us searching for different ways of learning to code, whether that is searching for like learn to code through a video game or something more generic that brought them to TwilioQuest. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think like overall the response we haven't seen any pushback, I would say.
No, actually, because I was realizing that maybe it was not a very intelligent question, because as opposed to maybe, where with former initiatives where you had to go to like a market here, like startups in Barcelona, startups in Madrid, startups in London, startups in Berlin, whatever. This is much more global because the tech ecosystem, open source, is not based locally. I mean, of course, it's local meetups, but usually, we're talking about Ruby on Rails. It's like a group of international people working remotely and this kind of communities, right? So, but yeah, but it's more genuinely questioning about whether there was some sort of resistance from any kind of players. I don't know. Maybe what's your relationship with the bootcamps, actually? So, is it something they can be using, or they see as a competitor?
So that's a very interesting question. I don't think they see us as a competitor, but I also don't think we've quite figured out exactly where we fit in the bootcamp landscape. Also, because through all the conversations I've had over the last year, I've learned that there are so many different approaches to bootcamps, right? Different durations to the programs, different levels of expertise required before the program even kicks off. And so a lot of the conversations we've been having with them is around like, initially the response is very positive, but where do we fit? Is that just something that students can do for fun alongside what they're learning? Or actually, is there an opportunity for us to more specifically be built into the curriculum that's being taught in the classroom? But yeah, our community is global, as you say. And so it has been really fascinating to learn about like how boot camps, how middle school teachers, how high school teachers, how university lecturers are approaching their curriculum differently in different countries.
Yeah.
And I mean, sorry, I think, Kevin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna pile into another learning that Chiara has unearthed as we've been talking with educators, is that there's actually like the relationship they want to have with industry, with like businesses like Twilio, is to understand like, well, what are the skills that you would like to equip students with? Like, what's going to make them more employable? What's going to make them more successful once they graduate from these programs? And I think that's like what we're trying to equip them with through TwilioQuest is we feel like at least like one little sliver of what is going to help students and in their post-education lives is understanding APIs and how they sort of supercharge what you're able to do. Like understanding that you don't have to build a payment system. Stripe exists for that. Like you don't have to build like an SMS integration. Twilio exists for that. Like understanding what these tools are and how they plug in, and like principles of REST and machine-to-machine communication. That's like what we've heard more from educational institutions versus like, hey, we don't want to work with, greedy corporations. It's more of like, what do our students need to be successful out in the marketplace?
What stage is TwilioQuest at right now? I mean, like in regionally speaking, B2B software, it's you trying to push out your communications and integrating with people. But it comes a point in which this is completely reversed and people ask to be integrated with you, right? You become the platform, and then Stripe comes and says like, whoa, it seems like you got an interesting number of people here. Potentially, they could be my customers. Can I build something that integrates with you? Right now, where does TwilioQuest stand?
I think like what we hope to have happen is like we've invested a tremendous amount in this platform. We've had, we have tens of thousands of players coming through the platform every year. We've figured a few things out by making a lot of mistakes about like how to build a platform like this one. So like with the authoring tools, like we've been working with a couple of like peer developer relations organizations to try some experiments with building content for TwilioQuest. So I think we'll see if we want to allow like other organizations that serve developers to use this platform too. And I think like their early success and like, engaging with this audience will kind of dictate where TwilioQuest falls. But generally like our focus is just on the early career community that we want to serve with like our first party content. And we hope some of those other things start to materialize, but it's not something we're super focused on.
No, but also, in terms of at least open source, the open source community is very grateful. So they like to pay back to the communities they learn from. But that comes after a few years, right? So maybe I think you mentioned that you launched like 3 years ago. So maybe still too early for these new generations to sort of acknowledge that they are already like, oh, I need to go and to TwilioQuest and pay back and create my own tutorials. Maybe it's too early for that to see some results. But I wanted to nerd out on something very specifically right here. And that question is for you, Kevin. It's like, you got 8-bit music, retro gaming, game view, this two-dimensional, grid-like that reminds me of games like Ultima Online, RPG-like gameplay, these dial-up modems, and sounds like that. It all kind of like boils down to nostalgia. So who's like to what extent did you design all of this? Are you like the uber nerd mastermind that designed the gameplay, the icons, the imagery, the music, and all of that? Or have you used different kinds of theme within Twilio?
So I definitely would be sort of the arch nerd, I guess, of the like that sort of have composed various pieces. But like the music, for instance, like we actually one of my colleagues, Sam Agnew, who's a developer evangelist for Twilio, is pretty into like chiptune,
It's
you know,
really
music
good.
creator communities. So we like approached, you know, a half dozen artists whose like work that we liked, and just kind of commissioned some tracks from like from I would drop a lot of names that won't mean anything if you're not way into chip tunes, but we found a lot of really great artists to collaborate on the soundtrack. So I'm definitely not capable of doing those things. A lot of the art in the game, like some of it was created by me. Some of it we
Nice.
you know got from you know, basically like buying from itch.io, like every other indie game developer out there. But the new version of the game will be almost entirely done by Carrie Lake, who's a pixel artist that's worked on a lot of indie projects.
Wow.
And she's fantastic. So she will replace all of my crappy artwork with beautiful, nice artwork in the upcoming version. But a lot of the dialogue I wrote like in the JavaScript and Python missions. The actual instructional content, I created a decent amount of it, but we have also had like large numbers of contributors inside Twilio that have created content. And then Ryan Kubik, who's my technical partner in crime, he's really been the engine of creating like everything that makes the game go. He's also created a bunch of content in the JavaScript mission, and is kind of the beating heart of our engineering efforts these days as I spend more time doing managery things. But yeah, it's definitely been a team effort, but I have jealously held on to the director role because I love this too much to not be a little bit engaged in each of these pieces of the creation of the project.
And related to that, like diving deeper into the nostalgia, because it seems like you doubled down on nostalgia. You went hard on nostalgia, right? I stopped playing video games when they were not pixelated anymore. So I can really understand that. That's why I like the 8-bit music and all of these general vibe around the game. But like, did you think that was going to work from the very beginning? Or because some kind of feeling about this going retro that's right now, if not done properly, can be perceived as cheap. But for the most part, it can also be perceived as a meme. But it seems like it's building you a great business here within Twilio, right? So what part of it, or how did you calibrate the expectations between like, wow, I want it to be like really nerdy, but I also want it to work, right?
Yeah, totally. I think like the original decision to make it more of like a 8-bit, 16-bit theme came from like working with an audience of professional developers who might actually remember you know, playing 8 or 16-bit games in their own childhood. So we did trade heavily on nostalgia there. I think like in the next iteration of the art and the upcoming iterations of the game, we want to stay within that realm because we find like that art style charming. But hopefully it'll be more like akin to a Stardew Valley than, you know, a Final Fantasy VI. Like the charm of pixel art, I want to retain, but I think like the style we want to evolve because, yeah, we are getting to the point where we're serving a generation of kids who like the most low-tech video game system they've ever encountered is like a Nintendo 64, and they're like, oh
Yeah.
man, that's so retro. When like, you know, when I was in college, like that was the, you know, the thing that we played. So like we definitely need to make sure that we're connecting with the audience and have the same cultural context.
Yeah, because the second part of the question, and that was more directed to Chiara perhaps, is like, but maybe by creating this sort of like retro, like for kids who grew up in like the late 80s, early 90s, that's all right. We are already like directors of areas, directors of companies, but not precisely learning how to code. The kids who are learning how to code, they were born in, you know, in the year 2000. So that's literally, they haven't seen anything that is not 3D. So maybe they can be put off by these kind of graphics. I don't know. What's the demographics of your platform more or less right now on average, Chiara?
Yeah, the majority of our audience sits between like ages 18 and 35 in terms of.
All right, I'm still there.
Yeah. And it's definitely something that we've talked about, as Kevin said. I think like there's ways in which we could stay within the same style, but create experiences that allow folks to engage with the game in different ways. So like, I'm a huge Pokemon fan. I grew up playing a lot of Pokemon.
We should talk about that. All right, go ahead.
And so like being able, and also like one of my favorite parts of Pokemon is like being able, in the new version of the game, is to be able to like dress up the person that I play as.
Your avatar, yeah.
Yeah, my avatar, exactly. But also like the ability to battle, right? And so when I was playing last year, we talked about like how could we incorporate different experiences that resonate with, you know, players who are looking for different things within TwilioQuest, still within the same art style.
What else did you borrow from Pokemon? Did you play Sword or Shield last year?
I played Shield.
All right. I'll play Sword. So we should definitely link up on Switch and
Yes.
exchange things there. I'm a huge Pokemon nerd as well. Everybody knows it in the company. I mean, you need to only go to my Twitter profile and you will see a reference to it. But what else? So what other inspirations, not only in terms of video games, question for both of you, in terms of video games, but also in terms of educational content, because we mentioned prior to this conversation that, you know, there's a whole bunch of programming tutorials out there that also like sort of gamified, kind of like there's that one, there's Rails for Zombies, or a very similar name, like I did like 8 years ago, something like that. There's a bunch of others like that. Where did you draw the inspiration from to create this sort of tutorial-like platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we had because TwilioQuest kind of came from a place of like we were scratching our own itch. We were doing first party training in a way that made sense for our developer community. We didn't kind of start off in a place where like we are going to create an educational product and bring it to market. We just kind of discovered like, oh, this model seems to be working. The one kind of inflection point where we did have to make a choice about like, are we going to follow what other platforms are doing, or are we going to do something different, is when we decided to make the decision to go to the desktop instead of being like a browser-based application. We wanted the ability to be able to create content that could teach anything without and allow the developer to write code for any environment. And we were thinking through like, well, if we wanted to be able to do that in the cloud, like we would need to create sort of a secure containerized environment where we could run your Rust code or whatever. Or if we went to the desktop, we could use the tools that were already installed on your computer and also, you know, allow you to configure your own local development environment and sort of equip yourself for success that way. So that's probably like where we zagged the most from like sort of conventional wisdom is, you know, we wanted to be able to teach any kind of technology. We wanted you to be able to or we wanted to be able to provide you feedback on whether or not you've configured your development environment successfully. So going to the desktop allowed us to do that. So we could interface and see like, oh, you have Git installed. Great. Or like, yes, you have checked out this Git repository in this folder, and we can validate that by, you know, writing code that executes on your desktop. So we definitely like drew a lot of inspiration from like the Codecademies and Udemy, and like there's been sort of an explosion of really great, and all those tools remain awesome, like Code Combat and those types of things. I drew a lot of inspiration from those, but like our focus was on trying to like equip people with skills to be a developer, you know, and configure their local development environment and those types of things as well.
Circling back, there was another thing that I totally forgot to ask back when we were talking about the demographics of people using this, right? One of the main crutches I've got against boot camps is that they are not very diverse in the sense that they are forcing you to go to places and socialize and do a lot of like teamwork. And definitely that's not for everybody, right? There are people who just don't want to socialize. There are people who learn also faster, and they are not good at teamwork, and that's perfectly fine. There are super good developers who are not good at teamwork, or they can just learn from the comfort of their homes, or they cannot afford moving to other cities, right? Therefore, there's also like a part of like social class, background, and whatever. And one of the things that I think like TwilioQuest might democratize a little bit more and broaden the diversity and this kind of learning, the programming learning, is that you might be able to also service this kind of people. Have you also noticed that you've got also different kinds of people from more diverse backgrounds, from like third world countries or underdeveloped countries? I don't know what's the right word for that, or more like extremely introvert people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's tricky to know specifically, but I can say that we're very intentional about serving diverse communities. And so a lot of the work one of our colleagues, Margaret, does, she runs a weekly stream on Twitch. And each month we select an organization that we partner with as around a specific topic. And she brings folks together to talk about really important topics, as well as playing TwilioQuest and encouraging folks from all over and from all backgrounds to engage. So I'd say the fact that you can play TwilioQuest anywhere makes it so that you don't need to be in a physical place to learn. And then we do also have the option for folks that do want to socialize with TwilioQuest in hosting their own TwilioQuest events. They're called operations. They can play either in person at a physical meetup or virtually from wherever they are. But yeah, Kevin, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the having a diversity of options for how you learn is generally a good thing, and we've seen just anecdotes from the community. Like we have a Discord server where TwilioQuest players will hang out and chat from time to time. And I was chatting with somebody a few months ago who had struggled to get into programming a few times. Like they had gone through like online tutorials, but they couldn't figure out how to like transfer their skills from like this browser-based thing that they did to like understanding how to actually write code on their computer. So the fact that TwilioQuest like took them through like installing Python on their computer, creating a .py file like in the terminal and executing it with the Python command. Like those were like the muscles that they needed to develop to be able to be like, oh, this is how like I actually write code. Like I understand how the syntax works in the browser, but like the actual motions of being a developer are really what I needed. And we had another woman who was like a Salesforce administrator who had wanted to learn how to code forever. And she was in a similar situation where it's like, well, yeah, I see the syntax in the browser and I can complete the exercise, but I don't feel like I'm any closer to like writing and shipping my own code. So I think like just providing different types of experiences that fit into different parts of the learning journey is part of the strength of the platform as well.
And it's a pity that we'll not have time to talk about all of this because we didn't even go into the science of learning, like the methodologies of how to teach different, like, different styles in teaching programming and how to structure the content, how to create evergreen content or how to keep it updated. I think that entirely deserves another episode. So I don't know. I will contact you in a few months, or maybe for version 2, we'll have you to drill down specifically on this part because I'm really passionate about that. But I didn't want to just go over it. But just one question on that topic. We can go as deep as you want in the next episode. But who is in charge of designing the content and the teaching style and the methodology? Because educational, like edtech, is pretty complex, and people think it's about just creating some courses and structuring them here and there and have some sort of methodology, but it's way more complex than that because there's the reward system, there's the like how you call it, like a classification or like leaderboards, and it might be like really, 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 really broad to speak about it. But what kind of team have you assembled to deal with this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So early on, there was a time when Team TwilioQuest was like just me, right? And
yeah.
like I kind of had to make some choices about like how content was going to go and those types of things. I think like now as the team has grown, there's a few of us with different specialized skill sets. And
how many people are you right now?
There's 6 people on the team right now.
Nice.
And one of our most recent additions to the team is a really great instructional content designer who has worked at like Treehouse and like done some other like educational video content in the past.
Great.
And I think like the level of like rigor that we want to bring to the content is starting to come into place where we have like a sense of, all right, this is what a good outline looks like. Because I think like we've sort of discovered organically what has worked and has not worked in creating our own content. And that's definitely been the hardest part of the process, is like figuring out what to actually build and like what is actually useful. So I think like we are now at the point where we have figured out like, oh, this is how people play TwilioQuest. This is how they want to consume content in this medium. And I think we also now understand like, oh, this is what education needs from us, or what educators need from us. And I think we also have a better sense of like how to structure that content. So I think like the upcoming release is going to be a major step forward in that sense of like fitting within education more appropriately, and us knowing how to structure the content. Because like I think that's the trickiest part, is coming up with the learning objectives and making sure that they're appropriate for the audience that you're bringing them to. It is definitely a big topic to dive into, but I think with the team that we have in place now, we have a better chance of doing it than we did when it was just me and Ryan. So.
And it seems you're still learning from the people using it, from your users, and that as the team is evolving, as the product is evolving, we'll be accumulating more knowledge. So for the next time, we'll have a clear answer on this. We need to wrap this up, folks. We're running out of time. It's been fantastic because like I didn't take a look at the time. It's like, God damn it, like we're already at 1 hour. But we usually wrap it up with our signature question, which is a very, very difficult question. And that is, we want you, both of you, to share what's the biggest tech or product fuck up you've done so far, and what have you learned from it. And if you can, for bonus points, can you kind of quantify it in money?
Wow, let's see.
Can be tech, product, design, difficult design decision, but related to technology.
I don't have like a great, like I shipped a bug to production story. I do have like so I was a developer evangelist when I've been a developer evangelist for many years. And yeah. I was doing a demo at an IBM conference, which at that point was like the biggest audience I'd ever been in front of. It was like 2,000 people in like a giant convention center in Las Vegas. And I was doing like sort of the canonical Twilio demo where you need to like send you make a phone call, and then like all the phones in the audience ring. But I had to do it like on a demo computer that was not my computer, with a Ruby environment. Like I usually program JavaScript, so I know enough Ruby to be able to do it. But like they had configured IRB to like swallow all the error messages, so I didn't like see the errors during the demo. So it was just like a massive demo fail where like I was supposed to make phones ring and I didn't, and there were 2,000 people looking at me like I was an idiot. And that's definitely one that sticks out to me as like, a major failure of my technical demoing abilities.
So everybody was like holding the phones like, why? It's not
ringing. Yeah, they're just like waiting for it, like it's not ringing. And again, because like the error messages were being swallowed on this demo computer, I had no idea that anything was going wrong. It was.
So you still don't know, to this day, you still don't know what happened?
I later figured out it was because like I was using a new Twilio account, as we typically do. Like we used like a special demo account. Yeah. And we had changed it up such that like you had to, instead of by default being able to send messages to all countries, you had to individually enable each of the countries to send to. So like one of the first like outbound phone calls I tried to make was to like a foreign outside the US phone number, and then that blew up the entire script.
Permissions thing, right?
Yes.
All right. Chiara, we want to hear yours.
Yeah, so mine's definitely not as technical. It's probably one that will resonate more with marketing folks in your audience. And it was early on, pre-SendGrid. I was working for a startup, and I was entrusted with a monthly newsletter send, and had spent so much time reading over and sending myself like 100 tests to make sure that everything was right in this newsletter. And then scheduled the send, I think it was on a Friday, like for the Monday. And the Monday comes around, the email goes out, and it's like a completely blank email to the entire audience. And I was
what happened?
I was in such a panic that I don't know. I managed to send a sorry, the typical sorry, we didn't mean to send you that email. But it was definitely a lesson early on like check, like keep checking and testing your emails before they go out. Working at SendGrid helped with that for sure.
I was gonna say shameless plug, but like we SendGrid, it wouldn't have happened, right?
Never.
So it's safe to assume that was a competitor that you were using back in the day. I didn't think that quite work out that well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's been fantastic. Time has, flew by. Like I still have a lot of questions regarding but I will be looking forward to trying the second version of the game. Just don't ditch the 8-bit and the nostalgia. Just double down on that
Never,
because it's been
never.
really, really good. Okay. If you can guarantee that it will still be there, we'll try it. And of course, eager to learn more about the science of learning and how to teach people programming languages. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.